So today's question is to find the missing parentheses in a given expression. What that means is an expression, when we start grouping things, we use parentheses. And we know that, for example, this kind of groups this together, except like here, this is supposed to group all of this together, but it's actually missing. I mean, it could group it here, it could group it here, but essentially we know that there is a missing parentheses, so we have to figure out whether it is an opening a parentheses or a closing parentheses. So how we're going to do this is that we are going to iterate through this whole to our input, which let's say it's a string. We're going to iterate, and as we're iterating, we're going to check the character that is inside. So we're going to have different conditions. The first one being that it is an opening parentheses. Now, when we encounter an opening parentheses, what's going to happen is that we're actually going to push it into a stack. So we know that a stack is LIFO, that it's last in, first out. And so we're going to push that element inside. We're going to continue into the next character, and we're going to find another condition that we're going to look for is whether it is a closing parentheses. So when it is a closing parentheses, we are assuming that we should have encountered already an opening parentheses. So how we're going to check that is, again, have we encountered an opening parentheses? It should already be in our stack. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pop it. We're going to pop it, and we're going to kind of keep track of that element. So we're going to save that into a variable, and what another condition would be, like in the case that it was a closing parentheses, within that we're going to check that the element that it was popped, that there actually is something there. So if there's nothing there, that means that a closing parenthesis appeared before an opening parenthesis, which is wrong. So we know already that the parenthesis that's missing is an opening one. Now, in order to check that we have actually the right amount of opening parentheses, how we're going to do that is that we're going to look at our length of our stack, and if the length is more than 0, then we know that we have one too many for our opening parentheses, because had there been an evenly distributed amount of opening and closing parentheses, that means that the pop would have always happened. So now we're just gonna kind of like code that up. So we have let's have like our function find missing parentheses, and it's going to take our string, so it's going to take an input. So now the first condition, let's kind of like declare the variables that we're going to use. So we know that we're going to use our stack. So we're going to create kind of like an empty array. Now what we're going to do is, let me use a different color because I don't think you can see it. Now we're going to also keep track of our element, and right now it's going to be empty. There's nothing going to be in it. Now again, the first condition was to check, to kind of like iterate through the input. So we're going to iterate. So we're going to do a for loop, for var I0 I is less than input dot length. Go to the next one. I'm just gonna put that here, and I forgot my closing. Okay, so now let's check. Let's check our characters. So the first condition was to check for the opening one. So if input at I is equal to this character, the opening parentheses, then we are going to push that element or that value that's there. So we're going to get our stack, which right now is empty. We're gonna push that character, and that is our first condition. Now let's go through it and look at the other conditions. So the other conditions that could happen that we want to account for is else if our input I equals a closing, then we are going to we know that should already be one there, so we're going to pop the elements. So we're gonna go in our stack and we're gonna pop it, and we're actually gonna save that variable in our element. And so now within that, what we have to take into consideration is, okay, was there actually something in there? Is there actually something in there? So we're gonna have another if condition that checks if there's nothing in it. So if there's nothing in that element, then that means that there was nothing in that stack, as in there was no opening parentheses, aka that means that the opening parenthesis is missing. So we are going to kind of like return missing opening parentheses. So we're going to return that. Now, other things that we have to account for is if the parentheses, if there's too many of the opening parentheses, as in there's not a closing parentheses. So to check for that, what we can do is we can, so after kind of like we iterate through everything, we can check. So after we're out of the for loop. I'm just gonna move this here. So we're already out of the for loop. So what we're gonna do is that our stack should be empty. So we are going to check that. If it's not empty, that means that there's too many opening parentheses, aka there's a missing closing parentheses. So if our stack dot length is greater than 0, we're going to return missing closing parentheses. Now, should it hit that condition, it's not true, we're going to have a final return statement that's going to tell us that our input is actually balanced. It has the same amount of opening and closing parentheses, and it starts also with an opening parentheses. So return balanced parentheses, and then I'm just gonna move that squiggly to here, and that is it. Oh, and the time complexity for this one, it will be big O of n, because we are iterating through all of these values at least one time, or we're iterating through them one time. And our space complexity, we are using an extra data structure to keep track of this. So it would be a space complexity of O1, I think. I'm not sure. I think so, but yeah.